panel explores a fast-emerging intersection for North Texas, the growing film and media economy and its impact on commercial real estate. Moderated by Dean Bobby of Texas A&M, this conversation brings together Taylor Hardy of Visit Fort Worth and the Fort Worth Film Commission, Mike Berry of Hillwood, John Hockenyos of TXP, and Pintoo Shah of SGS Holdings. As filming activity accelerates across Fort Worth and Tarrant County, our panelists will examine what's driving the momentum, how sustainable it may be, and what it means for development, infrastructure, incentives, workforce, and long-term investment. From studio facilities and adaptive reuse, the mixed-use development and the sporting industries that follow, this discussion focuses us on how film is shaping the built environment and where the opportunities lie next. Thanks.
Good to see you.
Well, good morning, all. We're going to draw on the acting talents, artistic talents, musical talents of the panel. Pintoo will begin with a song. No, I'm kidding. We're excited to help close out this morning's program by focusing on an area in which I think we all expect tremendous impact on Fort Worth, on Tarrant County, over the next few years. We're already seeing that, obviously, and we'll talk some about what we've seen to date. But really, there's incredible upside potential. I think we all realize that. We can look at ratings, we can look at sort of conversations, we can look at social media. But here we're really seeing it on the ground in terms of real estate impacts and business impacts as well. And so this really is a great topic, I think, for us to close out this year's forecast by focusing on. We've got a great group to focus on that. Tim McLaughlin, my colleague at Texas A&M, who leads the School of Performance Visualization Fine Arts, would like to be with us, but he has a hacking cough, and he decided to listen to him. Hacking up on the stage wasn't attractive. So I'll fill in a little bit of that, or do my best to. But anyway, let's get started with Taylor Hardy. Taylor, of course, as was mentioned, is our film commissioner here in Fort Worth. Set the stage for us a little bit. What's been the broad arc of growth in film and television production over the last couple of years, 2-3 years, here in Fort Worth and Tarrant County?
Yeah, well, I wanted to go back a little bit further to the last 10 years, which is when the Fort Worth Film Commission was established. That's when we really started tracking the growth in film. It was kind of a turning point for our city. Before that, we were losing a lot of business to Dallas. They were representing the entire Metroplex, and they didn't know our locations in our community. So our role at the Film Commission is to promote the city as a film destination and support projects on the ground. So it's really attracting projects here, and I wanted to emphasize that because we work with really great partners who help on that business attraction and talent relocation piece. So we're really just those projects. When we launched, we didn't have the infrastructure or the incentives that we needed to be competitive, but Fort Worth was still a really attractive option for filmmakers. We had things like diverse locations, from the historic stockyards to modern buildings in the cultural district. We have very talented crew that's living in Fort Worth and working locally. DFW Airport, huge asset for us. We're right between New York and Los Angeles with more direct flights and more availability than cities like Austin or Oklahoma, which are some of our competition. I think also what makes Fort Worth different is we have so much heart. One of my favorite things is when we host filmmakers and take them to locations, and instead of starting with, well, how will filming inconvenience me, or how much are you going to pay me, we have conversations about, let me tell you the history of the building, or this business has been in my family for 3 generations. And I think that pride in our city is something that's just really infectious or contagious, inspiring for filmmakers. So it's been great to see this kind of momentum. When we first started the Film Commission, we were fighting for 1 scene in a movie, 1 commercial, 1 day of filming. But we started to gain momentum because people came to Fort Worth and had an incredible experience. So a great example of this is David Lowery, who's one of the first filmmakers we worked with. He's based in Dallas, was looking for a construction pit for a film called The Ghost Story, and exhausted all of his resources in Dallas, came to Fort Worth, and we were able to get it done. From there, he came back to film Old Man and the Gun for about 2 weeks, pick up scenes, which was Robert Redford's last film. Brought a film called Never Going Back after that, which was our first independent film fully based in Fort Worth, and then has come back for every project he can since. Another great example of that repeat business that we'll talk about a lot today is Taylor Sheridan. We started working with him in 2021 when he was looking for an equestrian scene for Yellowstone. After that, he brought 1883 to the city. That was our first major show based in Fort Worth. And from there, we've had Bass Reeves 2 seasons of Lioness, 2 seasons of Landman, and now the Madison and Dutton Ranch, which are new Yellowstone spinoffs. So last year we had 5 productions that were Taylor Sheridan shows coming through Fort Worth. So just really record levels. I did want to take a minute to brag on Landman for a second. We got some great data in last year from Variety's year-end report. There were 20 billion minutes watched worldwide of Landman Season 1 and Season 2 in 2025. So to put that in perspective, if you were to watch Landman from the moment you were born for about 80 years, average lifespan, that'd be 475 human lives. So I think it's really exciting that our city is showcased in this way. It's been just a Cinderella story for Fort Worth, and I really think it's just beginning. So quick summary of the last 10 years and how we got to where we are now.
Thank you, Taylor. And so, Pintoo, you've kind of been central to all of those minutes, so thank you for that. But tell us about sort of SGS's experience working in Fort Worth, working in Tarrant County. Obviously, Taylor paints a picture of kind of the arc of this last decade or so. But really, again, as you say, as she mentions, Taylor has been kind of a driver of this incredibly over the last 4 or 5 years. Tell us about SGS's experience and how you have felt welcomed and engaged in Fort Worth and Tarrant County.
Yeah, thank you. I probably don't have this thing on, so there we go. Can you hear me now? Yeah, it's perfect. Thank you. No, we've had a fantastic experience here in Fort Worth. SGS Studios, which is the facility, the real estate property that supports all the wonderful shows that Taylor just mentioned, was a vision that we had back in 2022. We started having conversations with the city officials, with Taylor and team, saying, hey, how do we build studios and infrastructure here to sustain long-term growth from a production facilities perspective? And that led through a lot of conversations of how do we help? I mean, the city was extremely proactive. What can we do? Then we had our partners at Hillwood, and we reached out to them. Thank you, Mike. And we were saying, hey, Mike, we need some space. And what was a dream and a vision probably 3 years ago has become reality, where we do have the largest sound facility here in Texas. And ironically, it started back in January of 2025. That's when we actually signed our lease. And by the end of 2025, we've actually produced 4 shows in that facility. So the fact that we took a spec warehouse and converted it to sound stages, as well as we're able to shoot Landman, Lioness, Yellowstone spinoff, as well as Madison, has been just a fantastic journey. And that wasn't going to be possible without the help of our business partners like Mike and Ross Berlin team, as well as the city in terms of helping us expedite. You've heard earlier, fastest permitting process. I come from LA. Like the stuff we did here within 9 months would have taken us 5 years. So we really appreciate the help.
Wonderful. And again, you mentioned Hillwood and Mike. I know Mike wants to ask, after seeing Jerry Jones's cameo, when he will get his cameo in season 3, but more specifically.
You already asked me that question. I told you I like it behind the camera.
That's it.
No,
He wants executive producer
checks are
credit.
just fine with me.
All right, so Mike, tell us a little bit from Alliance Texas perspective. You've obviously been a key partner, as Pintoo mentions, to SGS this last year or two, in terms of the impact they're having. How have you thought about meeting the real estate needs of the film and television industry? And what are kind of the secondary effects that you're seeing from that work?
So let me give you a little bit of background as to how we got in the business with Pintoo and David and Taylor and their whole team. We started hearing about the need for studio soundstage space from David Glasser and actually from Visit Fort Worth. And Mitch Witten actually called me and said, because he had built a relationship with David, and he said, they need more studio space. And we'd never been in that business. We build spec industrial buildings. Long story, I got to meet David with Robert Allen at a Visit Fort Worth board meeting. I finally got David to sit down and describe what they needed. At that time, they were filming initial scenes of Lioness and Landman down in South Fort Worth in an old Amazon, or not an old Amazon building, a new one that we had actually built for Amazon. And I said, so where are you doing it now? He said, oh, it's 10,001 South Freeway in Fort Worth. And I said, 10,001 South Freeway? I said, we built that building. So we went down there and we toured it, and it was, it was doable. And they built giant sound walls to create these bays inside the building from slab to deck. And that's about it. Then the talented team of these builders, you wouldn't believe quality of craftsmanship that their millwork and construction team, they build these sets literally to the millimeter of perfection. So you can't, because you can't have a flaw on a set. Your viewers will catch that. So anyway, we looked at it, and other than power and HVAC, it wasn't complicated. So we started our conversation with them. We were building these 2 spec buildings, and they said, we probably need 40 to 50,000 square feet, which is 2 stages. Call it 20 to 40,000 per stage. So we started down at one end of the building, and we started to negotiate a lease, and we were going to do it. And then we had barely gotten started in our conversation, said we're going to need the whole building. And then we said, okay, so we expanded our scope. Hardly into those discussions where they said we're going to need the second building. So Pintoo already described it. We then took both of those buildings, which total 450,000 square feet, just dropped sound walls in them and created these large bays, juiced up the HVAC, juiced up the power, and now they're producing 4 shows in there, and it's full all the time. It's been incredible.
Absolutely. I want to turn to John Hockenyos to talk about some of the economic impacts of this. As I mentioned, Tim McLaughlin, from Texas A&M, couldn't be with us today. He works in the visualization space, a lot of work around animation and gaming that A&M has had strengths and is bringing here to the community, and obviously ties into critical elements of that. We're building what's called a virtual production studio right in downtown, where all you know we saw. We're building this new campus, and the idea is we'll bring A&M assets, students, faculty, creatives to Fort Worth. But as importantly, the idea is that it will serve as an asset for the community, for the broader community, for the business community, for others, as a facility, a place that they can use, this virtual production studio, use for the work that they're doing in this space. But again, as Chancellor Pullen mentioned, TCU is in the middle of this kind of work in terms of training students and obviously hosting productions here on campus, but also in terms of students being behind the camera and the work that they're doing in that regard. And Tarrant County College, meanwhile, is doing incredible work in partnership with the Film Commission in terms of the workforce associated with growing the film and television industry. There's only so much that the facilities and the creatives can do if we don't have the workforce in place. And so higher education in many ways is trying to be a part of the solution to ensuring that we are meeting these needs. But let me turn to you, John, with a couple of questions about, I want to hear kind of from your vantage, what have been the economic impacts of the film and television production growth in Fort Worth and Tarrant County to date? And talk to us a little about these new state incentives that are in place and what impact they can be expected to have.
So it's remarkable, actually, and I'm a numbers guy, so forgive me for digging into the numbers. And I'll tell you right up front, the numbers are just the tip of the iceberg on this. Prior to the pandemic in Tarrant County, there were about 500-ish people working full-time film and television productions, a given NAICS code. As of the middle of 2025, that number had skyrocketed up to 2,800 people. That's the sum of what these guys are talking about. Those 2,800 people were earning right around $100 million a year in wages. In the film industry, you can comfortably sort of say you pay about $1 in wages about 20 cents in wages for every dollar in revenue you take in. That means you're talking about a $500 million industry in 2025 in Fort Worth. You run that through an economic model, it's $1 billion. So in a very short period of time, the role of film media production in general in Fort Worth has gone up about 8x. It's now a $1 billion industry here. To give you a little context on that, Austin at its peak about 3 years ago had about 5,000 people working. It's down to about 4 today. Some of that is because of the lingering impacts of the writer strike in 2023. Atlanta, and we'll talk more about this, which I think is a really interesting go-by for Fort Worth, went from 1,000 people working in industry to 9,000 people working in industry. Today it's at about 7. So the impact is huge, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. And we'll talk more as we go forward.
Do you want to talk a little about the incentives? And
Sure.
Taylor coming in?
So one of the, I was involved in this for years. We would march up to the Capitol and go, we're not competitive. And people would go, yeah, whatever. And when we go back the next session, go, we're not competitive. And yeah, whatever. And that's one of the things that has been a major challenge in Texas for most of the last 10 or 15 years is most of the fundamentals were in place. People loved the diversity of locations, loved the access to the crew, loved the generally welcoming environment. But when you went back and said, we want to look at Texas, they're like, yeah, but what about New Mexico? What about Louisiana? What about Georgia, who had these far more aggressive incentives that changed, frankly, the calculation of where you were going to finance? So the new incentive program now makes us more competitive. There's more work to do, and I think you guys would probably amplify this. Modern film production increasingly relies on technology. Technology equals capital investment, and so what we have to do as a state, I think, is work even harder on making this the place all over the state, as well as locally here in Fort Worth, where capital feels like this is the place we want to make investments. New Mexico, Albuquerque did that. They were deep into this, and they bought quite a bit of market share for a period of time because they made it very friendly to capital investment. That's the future going forward, at least a portion of the future.
Taylor, do you want to say, and then Pintoo, I want to give you kind of reaction on how the importance of these incentives. But Taylor, share a little more of the state level and Fort Worth level incentive structures.
Sure. Yeah, the state level is really a massive investment. It's $1.5 billion over the next 10 years. And I think that piece is really important because in the past, we've had to go back every 2 years to renegotiate. This is that long-term commitment that productions needed to be able to have multiple seasons in Fort Worth. I did want to mention something interesting on the workforce piece. At the end of the day, it's a jobs program. Crews are required to hire 30% of their cast and crew. They must be Texas residents. So it's really incentivizing productions to work with locals, and that number is going to continue to grow up to 55% over the next 10 years. There's also a piece of the incentive that incentivizes productions to work with students. So there are what we call an uplift. So you can get up to 31% cash rebate for your local Texas spend. But there's an extra 2.5% that can apply if you're hiring students or working with a higher education institute. So I think that's really important and helps us to really grow our crew base and make sure we have that pipeline in place so we're getting students to work on set and stay in Texas.
Do you want to talk about kind of the importance of the incentives for your decision-making and business planning and investment in real estate and the like?
Yeah, I think John and Taylor touched on a lot of the topics, but if you think about a tax incentive, a long-term tax incentive is actually extremely important for folks to make capital investments, especially in this space, right? It provides some level of stability, but more importantly for us, from a production perspective, we also not only need tax incentives, we need infrastructure and we need crew. And for us to, and the crew is just a circular argument, right? If you don't have productions here, then you don't have a demand for crew, and if you don't have tax incentives, you won't have productions, which won't drive the demand for crew, right? And so in order for us, we hear this from our crew all the time, more and more people are moving to Texas because they feel like they have a pathway of continuous employment. And that wasn't present prior to this recent tax incentive that came out. I mean, honestly, from my own personal experience, I've looked at building studio campuses all over the world, and we evaluated the entire United States at one of my prior positions, and we looked at Texas, and Texas was like number 3 on our list. But the reason why we didn't build a huge facility here was because there was no tax incentive, there's no stability, and we ended up building that facility somewhere else. And quite frankly, it was in Atlanta, and I wish we had built it here now, right? So it's just, again, the incentive drives your ability to protect your capital, reduces your downside risk from capital, and that's what drives economic jobs, and that was why it's extremely important for us.
So I just wanted to jump in on this a little bit. So one of the things, I alluded to this earlier, and I think you've done a really good job of kind of describing that. How do you break that circle, right? How do you break that chain of we don't have the incentives, so we don't have the facilities, so we don't have the crew, so we don't get the incentives, so we don't have the facilities? Well, one of the things that I think makes Atlanta an interesting go-by for Fort Worth is Atlanta had an X factor, and that X factor was Tyler Perry. Tyler Perry wanted to be doing things in Atlanta. And that kind of broke that cycle a little bit and said to people, no, wait, we could really build on this kind of catalyst that he represents. Taylor Sheridan sure looks like the same kind of X factor here to me. And so when I think about the future of film in Fort Worth, I think you're looking at an Atlanta scenario where the number of people directly working here could easily more than triple over the next 5 or 10 years. And that $1 billion a year economic impact I mentioned earlier could be $5 billion a year. And then on again, we'll talk more about on beyond that.
Mike?
There's also sort of a hidden ripple effect that's happening
Yeah.
right now because of what we've started. Pintoo's being very modest. Pintoo was a senior executive at NBC Universal for many years. So he saw literally the industry at the highest level. And so when he says, well, I've built studios around the world, he really has. Pintoo is now fully engaged or largely engaged in all of the efforts of SGS here and other places, but also focused on how we expand the footprint that they've already started. So here you have a leading industry executive, career executive, now focused on Fort Worth and all of the things that need to be done to expand and attract the rest of the infrastructure. So that's just one benefit that Fort Worth is getting. And then all of the team, the 101 team, all their leaders have moved to Fort Worth. So that makes a huge difference because their Rolodexes are pretty significant. And when they start saying Fort Worth's a great place to work, people start paying attention.
People listen. All right, so I think we've set the scene of kind of what we had the last year. We had a great first season. I wanna turn to Taylor now to sort of looking forward as we think about kind of what's coming in the second season for Fort Worth and film and television production. Kind of what can we look forward to? What would be some of the predictions, some of the things you expect? Obviously with an eye to real estate and economic impact and development, but also more broadly.
Yeah, well, we're really at this turning point. I think for a while we were building our film-friendly community and that infrastructure and just raising awareness of Fort Worth. And now we're shifting our focus to how are we growing in a way that's sustainable for our community, optimizing our processes and really thinking through, what do we need to be doing next. So a major goal for the Film Commission is really diversifying our projects. We love having Taylor Sheridan here, and he is bringing so much business. But in a way, we kind of did things backwards in Fort Worth, where we started with these top streaming shows. So now we're looking at filling in those gaps, bringing in commercial projects, music videos, independent films. And this is super important when we talk about building a crew base, because you're not going to graduate college and be a department head for Taylor Sheridan. You need to have your hours on set and training, and we need these smaller scale projects to help our crew work up to that level. It's also a scheduling thing. Not everyone wants to work on a TV show for 4 months. So having, different types of projects here is going to be really important. I think also kind of goes to this union versus non-union. Texas is a right to work state, so you do not have to join the union, but a lot of those major productions are going to be union shows. Those are contracts that are negotiated at a national level with the studios. So it gives people this opportunity to get their hours and experience, but also making sure that we have different projects for skill levels and interests and non-union and union shows here. Oh, I did want to add on to that too. I think this is really a big opportunity for us because if we start to see more of these independent productions, we need more of these mid-sized studios. We have a lot of spaces in kind of this downtown core that are like 10,000 square feet or less, which is great for a photo shoot or a very small commercial project. We don't have a lot of spaces like SGS studios. Not everything needs to be that big, but studios in that maybe 10,000 to 50,000 square foot are going to be very valuable to help us attract more of these productions. And we do have a great sales tax exemption called the MPDZ program, or the Media Production Development Zone. So it applies to anywhere in Fort Worth city limits, and it's for creation of a creative space, so a studio, post-production house. You would need approval at a local level through our city council and economic development office, and then it goes on to the state at the Texas Film Commission and the comptroller for approval. But it's a really great opportunity to get those sales tax exemptions and to be able to attract more of that infrastructure to our city.
Okay, again, looking forward, Pintoo, I want to turn to you, sort of ask, do you see the growth continuing for you and for others? And if so, kind of what form will that take and what do you need? What are the things that as you look ahead, if SGS is to grow, if others are to grow in Fort Worth, in Tarrant County, what are the things that kind of we need to be putting on the table as effectively, more effectively than we have to date?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And to just really continue on with Taylor's theme here in terms of growth, it's also just not SGS and it's just not Taylor Sheridan shows, but really from a real estate perspective, right? Our shows are real estate hogs. Let's just be honest, right? We need 40, 50,000 square feet of a sound stage, but that also needs another 30,000 square feet of storage space. I mean, another 15,000 square feet of other random storage, warehouse space, because we have all these cars we got to put somewhere and they can't sit outside. Along with like every single one of our shows needs about 20, 30,000 square feet of office space as well, right? And so it's like we touch every single segment of real estate. And I think what's really required, and it's really interesting, is folks need to think about how you can do, these are short-term productions, right? So a lot of folks like, oh, I need a 10-year lease, I need a 5-year lease. But there's a lot of opportunities if you had ability to provide short-term real estate. And I think about full service, right? So one of the things that our shows and our productions love is just tell me what my monthly rent number is. I don't want to worry about utilities, taxes, CAMs, all the other stuff, real estate folks love to add on there. Just give me the number, right? It's like $100,000 a month. Here you go. Leave me alone. Make sure nothing breaks, right? Because we got to actually produce content, right? And so I think there is definitely an opportunity for folks, and especially when we're looking at some of the stuff that we're talking about earlier today, that there's segments where there's definitely, like literally yesterday, I had a phone call from my production and said, hey, I need 15,000 square feet of warehouse space Friday. I'm like, wait, today's Wednesday. Like, we have to sign a lease by then, but that's the piece of it, right? And like, called up my friends at Hillwood and said, here you go, and here's one piece of paper and we're done. And it's like a 6-month lease, and it's really easy, right? And I think that's what we really need, is the ability for the real estate industry to really move quickly with us, not slam us with like a 15-page or 100-page lease document. So we really just need it for 6 months, and quite frankly, the rates are really, really good. So there's a huge opportunity to actually make some economic growth there.
Awesome, great. And again, that brings us back to you, Mike, again. So obviously, we have the facilities that, you've described, and Pintoo described. In terms of what additional real estate opportunities do you see? And again, SGS, but also more broadly, obviously, again, that's sparking other conversations. In terms of at Alliance, but also for the city and county more generally.
So I'll just add on to what Pintoo was just saying about sort of the short-term demand need that pops up from time to time. The studios, so the way the deals work, the studios agree to buy the show for that season. And they have a budget to buy that show. And back to incentives, a $100 million show, up until this last session, Texas was like best case of 15% rebate. So on a $100 million show, that's still an $85 million net cost to the studio. Georgia's 30%. So we were $15 million behind on a $100 million show. So it was huge for us to get those percentages up to closer to Georgia, because at the end of the day, the studio makes the decision where you're going to shoot. Not Taylor, not Pintoo, not David. It's made by the studio based upon budget. So that's big. But then the wrap effect, sort of the single cost, they don't think about it in terms of rent per square foot. They think about it in terms of cost of soundstage as a percentage of the total cost of the show. So their lens, the studio's lens on budget approval, is different than those of us who lease and sell real estate every day, which, to Pintoo's point, you got to think a little bit differently. And it usually works out to the good, because the yields are typically better than you would normally get. So that's on the sound stages and sort of this velocity of demand. I think there's plenty of opportunity. There's a lot. I mean, Taylor and SGS are one machine, but the wave is starting to come, and I know from their team that they're now talking to other studios about, well, how much space would you have available during this window of time in our facilities, but that's going to create demand for others. So we've been talking to Pintoo and their team about a bigger campus, something that would be consolidated with sound stages, the back of house, the mill, the storage, the office, et cetera, at a larger scale. But that ripples all through the city. I mean, the more smaller stages that can be delivered around the city, the more we're going to bring more activity.
Let me ask kind of any of you, but again, Pintoo, maybe start, and others comment as well. Talk more about kind of, because I think it's helpful for lots of the folks in the room, the kinds of facilities. So again, and some of this may be the scale of SGS versus, the smaller scale. But again, some of the things like sound stages, backlots, high power industrial needs around some of these, technology-rich smart studios. What are some of the kind of, as this group thinks about, what are the kinds of facilities that will do the most work in advancing this long-term growth trajectory. Are there specific things for them to think about?
I mean, I think obviously with our stages, which is the driver for all the other real estate demands, that's where the productions are going to shoot, is there's definitely need for HVAC and power. Those are the two most critical items that we need on stages. Usually, shows will vary in size. I think the Taylor shows are the biggest shows I've ever seen in terms of how much space they take, to be honest with you. Most shows will take a lot less than what they have, and so you don't need a 300, 450, 500,000 square foot facility. You can make way with a 20,000, 30, or 40,000 square foot warehouse. And a lot of the shows, especially the ones that are not in LA or Atlanta, are okay with non-purpose-built stages, right? And what I mean by that is they're okay with building around columns, right? Which is really important. And that's why if you have space that's industrial, that's ready to go, it's not that hard for us to convert them. Now, would all the production designers love purpose-built and not have to worry about columns? Yes, but I think the rate differential is where the finance and the UPN guys say, no, it's okay, build around the columns, right? And so it's a little give and take from that perspective. So I think that's the key. And then I think I would never give a production Class A office space, by the way, because they'll just ruin it. So I always go Class B and Class C, just so you all know.
Good.
I mean, so they're not going to go to some of those amazing buildings down there. But I mean, I think Class B and Class C is perfect for productions. And so if you think through from that perspective, again, they're there for like 9 months, 10 months. And the funniest thing, one of my best stories is, sorry, I'll let you add in here, was productions will never buy anything because they don't know their future. And so I remember when I was at NBC Universal and we had the show called Law and Order, and we ended up renting the same building over and over and over again for 20 years. And we built that the builder was extremely happy. We built his whole empire over a 20-year period. And so I think that's what you should also remember is like productions will never just buy a building there. And if it's a successful show like a Yellowstone, you have a great 5-year run and you have such a tremendous amount of above market rents. So I know I was saying be flexible with your rates, but for some of these great shows, they'll just continue re-upping and it's really exciting. So.
Two other specs in these buildings that, whether they're purpose-built or whether it's an adaptation of a standard industrial. Clear height's very important to the production. So, I mean, our buildings that the current studios in are 36-foot clear. If we had 40 or even 50-foot clear, it would be better for them because the lighting that gets hung from the grid is pretty significant, and the more room they have to work with, the better. So they like more clear height. That's why the traditional purpose-built studios are clear span and super high clear height. I think the one other thing that's important to them is what we call elephant doors. They have to have oversized doors to drive trucks in and out of the studio because when they're moving sets in and out, it's a lot easier to bring in. So elephant doors, clear height, HVAC, and power are the sort of the 4 keys to a building.
And not being next to an airport, it's a soundstage.
Yeah, but soundproofing fixes that.
By the way, Mike, we're going to need more stages. We're going to have to talk after this.
Yeah, I know. That's a good thing.
Taylor, do you want anything on this?
I just wanted to add that we also have support services that are coming to Fort Worth. So things like Cinelease, which is equipment rental, or Bruce's Catering, other businesses that are popping up, and whether they're LA companies that are opening Fort Worth branches or local businesses that are expanding their business. So, I don't know as much about the real estate specs, but I think it's important to know that there are other opportunities around the studios. Sometimes, like SGS, will have some of these services on site, but there are other opportunities to support.
So what she just described is classic economic development. That's how it works. I'm an economic development guy. I've been lucky enough to be in and around doing some work around film, but that's how it goes. You have some catalytic activity, and then the ecosystem grows and expands around it. That's what you're talking about. Part of that ecosystem isn't quite here yet, but you all can be part of that, and that is kind of the professional services expertise, whether you're a finance guy, whether you're an accountant, whether you're an attorney, whether you're a real estate person, whatever it is, as industries evolve, the people who serve those industries need to evolve as well. And you heard great examples of that here about let's not focus on the rate per square foot, let's focus on the revenue we're generating under flexible terms, right? That's what happens. And we've seen this over and over again in different industries, particularly in modern industries that rely essentially on information fundamentally. And so what we're getting here is this really interesting confluence of information technology, put the right people around it, and that's why I said what we got today is just the tip of the iceberg.
Let me ask about the people. I want to ask Pintoo and Taylor to talk a little about kind of the workforce needs, the training needs. Again, this is a good opportunity for me to apologize. I talked to Mike about his role as a cameo. I have to apologize in advance, Pintoo, if it created troubles for you. I'm a unaccredited extra in one of the shows that I had to get to a meeting. I had to cross the street. They said action, and I crossed the street. So I apologize for that if that created any disruption for the lawyers. But as a matter of kind of the workforce training things that we might be doing in the community, the educational programs, are there things that, again, if we want to continue this growth, Pintoo, you think of as important, Taylor, you would identify as important?
Sure. Well, in addition to our partners like Texas A&M and TCU that have great training programs, we also partnered with 101 Studios in Tarrant County College to create a certification program called the Fort Worth Film Collaborative. And it's really fast track opportunities for training in areas where we saw a lot of gaps in the industry. So things like set construction, hair and makeup, grip and gaffers, or electricians, teaching them what they need to know, and then being able to place these students into production assistant roles or opportunities on Taylor Sheridan shows, which is really exciting to see that. And we are continuing to work to expand that program in new areas where we're finding needs. Production accounting is a big one. We don't have a lot of accountants that have the knowledge they need to work on a film set in DFW. So continuing to monitor that situation and see how we can address those to expand.
I mean, just to add to that, I think it's fascinating, and I say this all the time, there's like probably about 250 people for a production. And you can have everything from a medic to an industrial engineer. And just people just don't know that. I mean, it's such a depth of different positions. People always think about the cameraman, obviously the actors in front of the screen, maybe the boombox operator or the audio guy, but we have guys that are just carpenters, for example. We have electricians that work for us. We have janitors that work for us, for example. You know, we have craft services, we have chefs, we have medics. And so it's such an amazing opportunity. And look, the wages are typically really good as well. I mean, and they're really above normal, what a normal folk may make for that. In the production world, they have really great benefits and great rates. And so I think it's just education, right? And getting that out there, getting the message out there that, look, I mean, when I was growing up, I never thought I was going to be on a TV show ever. Like, that's not what my goal was, right? My parents never told me that. But if someone told me, hey, you can be an engineer and you can make $100,000 working for Taylor Sheridan, I'm like, yeah, I would have done that, right? And it's just that education that you have to get out there for folks to know that there's some great high-paying jobs, and they're not only actors, but there's a lot of behind-the-scene jobs that just people are just not aware of.
Mm-hmm.
One thing sort of layered on top of all of this, talked about all the quantitative benefits of the economic development ecosystem that gets built. There's also this branding, this qualitative benefit that Fort Worth is getting specifically around the Landman show. But you know, there was a scene, I told this story on our call. There was a scene in, I guess it was 2 or 3 episodes ago in Landman, where you have Cooper, Angela, and Ainsley driving in the pickup truck, and Cooper's talking about his wedding coming up, and they look at Ainsley and they said, well, what? She chimes in and says, you know, my ideal wedding would be to get married at St. Andrews in downtown Fort Worth and have my reception at the barn at Circle T Ranch, at Ross Perot Jr.'s barn at Circle T Ranch. And we tracked, Julie is here, she runs our marketing communications. She tracked the social media or the website hits on our CircleT.com website. On December 28th, which was when that episode ran, we had 24,800 single events, which is at least one page look on our CircleT.com website. So, I mean, that's a small example, but it's real.
So apropos of the unexpected jobs, Mike Berry is now available as a wedding planner.
No, I had to, there's a whole lot of sensitivity around that, by the way. I had to call David and say, if you're thinking about a wedding at the Circle T, we probably need to take that out of the script.
Talk. Taylor, do you want to talk about this phenomenon more generally? It's, again, film tourism is a fascinating thing to me, but like talk a little about kind of what we're seeing and what it is generally.
Yeah, I get really fired up about this. It's the fastest growing travel trend, and Expedia has said that 66% of travelers have been influenced or had a trip influenced by something they saw on a TV show or movie. We've done some research specifically on these Taylor Sheridan productions, and we've seen that half of audience members had their perception of Fort Worth improve after seeing Fort Worth featured on a show, and they're 2 times more likely to want to visit the city. So when you project the numbers out, that's about 250,000 additional visitors every year. And we've spent a lot of time talking about the economic impact of the filming itself and the production, but I think this is a really important piece because it's this additional layer. We know that tourism has about 250 million generated in local and state taxes every year. That's tax money that's going back into our community to benefit all of us. So I think it's an important piece, not just for the city, but also for the location owners who are benefiting from this added awareness and this visitation.
So I want to talk about John to tell us how big can this get? I feel like listening to all of you, we're in the start of a new arc of the Fast and Furious series. The question is, do we have 9 movies still in us? So John, talk to us about kind of like what is this? How big can this get for Fort Worth, for Tarrant County, and what is the story? It goes to what we're just talking about. Yeah. What's the story we need to tell to the broader world about who Fort Worth is, who Tarrant County is in that regard, if we want to see that continued growth?
Well, I said it before. I think Atlanta is not a bad sort of go by, at least for the foreseeable future. And so you'd be talking about an industry that's probably 5 times as big as it is today in Fort Worth, Tarrant County. Now, what'll that take? That'll take the growth of the whole ecosystem, right? That will not just be one guy. That one guy can be a bit of a catalyst, but that has to stimulate the whole ecosystem developing. And so what are the elements that go into that? Well, we've touched on most of them. One is capital investment has to feel like this is a safe and secure place with predictable incentives, understandable costs. When somebody wants to pull the trigger on hundreds of millions of dollars worth of investment, they want to feel like they're going to, be well treated when they're here. I think we're well on our way on that. 2, we talked about the catalytic effect. What that really is, that one person or that one entity stimulates things, but what it really is about is the people side of the equation. Talked about the workforce side of it, but the other side of it is the word's coming out, Fort Worth is a great place for creatives. And this, by the way, is, at least in my mind, really one of the big foundations of modern economic development. 25 years ago, I led a group in Austin saying, who do we want to be when we grow up? And we said, we want to be the place where smart, creative people want to live and work, and built everything we did around that. Well, if you look at the traffic today, we kind of succeeded beyond our wildest dreams, so we kind of overdid it. It'll be different here in Fort Worth. But as the place where creatives are with these other things, that really positions this community for long-term success. And that'll have ripple effects well beyond even what we've talked about before, because creating an environment where creatives, maybe in the short run associated with film and visual media, thrive, stimulates other creative activity, which informs other industries, which someday has an effect on corporate recruitment, has an effect on corporate retention. All of these virtuous things can stem from this kind of activity as a big part of the foundation.
Pintoo, I want to pick up on, and you can comment, Mike, also, maybe John, Taylor, whoever. So you talked about the idea that when you have a soundstage of X, tens of square feet, there's office space needs and storage for the cars and so on and so forth. So I want to hear kind of like, how do we generally, and you've seen this all over the world, kind of what are the ways in which the film production, TV production work has impacts on property values in the surrounding areas and has kind of the cascade effects on real estate growth and development in their surroundings?
Yeah, I think that's a great question as well. I think it just drives demand, right? Exactly what John was saying right now. We're going to probably put an industry here now that hasn't been here before. We're going to create an upteen amount of jobs, and that's going to drive apartment rentals, house sales, restaurants, small businesses, like even the local dry cleaner is going to be supported, right? And it ripples through the entire ecosystem, right, of an industry, which then will obviously drive more demand for real estate. And so what we've seen historically is we've seen prices increase, because not only that, you also have people that want to move here, right? So you're going to have people like we've just talked earlier. We've had the entire one-on-one team has shifted over here and have started purchasing homes. So I feel like the home pricing will also go up. So it's just a driver of increase in cost overall and rent and rates.
Mike, you want to comment that too? Just again, I'm thinking about kind of the sound stage. Obviously, you talked.
They
about
need a
going
lot
from
of
50 to
parking.
Whatever. Yeah. Good. Well, good. Yeah.
I'm not sure if that creates a lot of real estate value, but they need a lot of parking. But Pintoo touched on it. What we're hoping happens is sort of the technology side of this industry starts to come in. Because there's a huge piece of the business that they call the post-production piece, which is film editing, sound mixing, all of that. I know, about that much, but we've been to NBC Universal. We went to both studios in Atlanta and toured Assembly and Trilith to sort of get benchmarks. And, that's not a part that's here yet, but the more we can make it totally cohesive for the industry, the more the technology side will start to come here, and then we'll see a whole different level of real estate demand, because these are pretty sophisticated uses, but it also creates a talent level that sort of brings in a new tier, and that's what I'm hoping happens sort of next phase.
Well, you can imagine that has a cascade effect even across other industries, right?
Well-
Other industry sectors then benefit from that talent as well.
And, what you're doing downtown
Right.
with the media and visual arts center, there's already some other things going on around, what Tarrant County College and Visit Fort Worth and 101 started with there's a whole new sector that we can build.
Just a quick anecdote on that. I'm one of the founders of an advanced manufacturing kind of incubator and accelerator, again, down in Travis County. And so we're doing prototype work there. We're doing workforce development and all that. You know who we had build our facility for us once we had the shell? Robert Rodriguez's team. So the film industry is beginning to cross over into other technology-driven industry. You know why we did that? Because it was cheaper, better, faster. I mean, significantly cheaper, better, faster. We had a certificate of occupancy in 13 months from the day we bought the building. For any of you who've ever done anything in Travis County, that's more or less the miracle of the loaves and the fishes at the end of the day. And so, it's this capacity, it's this ability to use technology to address problems that the film industry does in really kind of cutting edge ways that can bleed over into other sectors of the economy as well.
Back to the real estate speed to market, to John's point. So Pintoo, we really in earnest realized what we had to deliver in December of last year. They had to be shooting Lioness on March 15th.
Right.
So we had to stand up the first stages between basically Jan 1 and March 15th. And we got it done. I mean, there were contractors on top of contractors. It was messy, but we got it done. And they were shooting essentially on schedule.
That's a good segue for we're wrapping up, but one of the last questions, again, rise of streaming platforms and so on and so forth, and the life cycle. If you talked about a little bit of Pintoo, but the Pintoo and Taylor, like, how do we think about that as real estate professionals in terms of like the life cycle? You mentioned one point, which is that the more you have the capacity to, move quickly, as Mike is describing, but also we've got this slot for 4 months, and then we got something else for them. But talk to us a little about like how real estate the industry ought to think about kind of the life cycle of what streaming looks like, the production schedules and timelines. Anything about that is useful for them to know about?
I think I touched on that a little bit earlier, but I think from a life cycle perspective, most productions, especially because if you've noticed, we don't have that many shows that are like 22 episodes anymore, right? Most of them are 10 episodes,
Right.
6 episodes, 8 episodes. And it's typically a month per episode, if you think about it, right? A show, from the time they actually figure out what sets they're going to build, they'll start building sets all the way through the time when they get into post-production, as Mike touched earlier. It's about 6 to 8 months. That's kind of the window. And I think a lot of sets, like our sets, for example, they've just left them up because they know they're coming back for the following season. And so you have that occupancy as well for like the next 4 months while they're down, supposedly, but the stages are still there. And I think there's also, I mean, just to touch on another point, there's a lot of, the vendors are really important. Like, we've had so many vendors that are looking to move into the Fort Worth area because they just have, I mean, to be honest with you, Texas and Fort Worth is probably the busiest town in the country right now. I mean, Atlanta was very slow, LA was very slow, but because Taylor was shooting here, I've had so many phone calls from vendors that are like, hey, we want to just move to Fort Worth, and we're seeing more and more of that. And their demand is retail space, their demand is office space, their demand is also warehousing space. And so a lot of our vendors have reached out and say, hey, look, if you have space, please let us know. We want to move 50,000 square feet of office space there. We want to move 40,000 square feet of warehouse space there because we want to support your shows because we're busy. And they appreciate it.
Anything you'd add, Pintoo, about the nature of those vendors and therefore the space they need, the kind of space they need?
Yeah, I mean, everything from like the security guy that provides
Yeah.
security to the stages that need some office space to transportation company that just needs yards of acreage of land to store their equipment, to the bathroom provider that needs to store their assets somewhere, to Cinellis, as you mentioned earlier, that needs to hang lighting and grip and needs to store lighting in a warehouse type depot. I mean, there are just various of types to like another company called Drew Audio that needs a retail front where, you know, people can go shop for anything they need from a sound audio perspective. So it's across all industries, to be honest with you.
Great. Taylor, do you want to add anything on that one?
I'll just talk a little bit about the timing on our end, because I think it's really important to understand that when we get requests from a project that wants to shoot in Fort Worth, we really try to get them information as quickly as possible. 24 hours, 1 week, having them here for a scout. But after we deliver that information, we don't know when they'll actually shoot. Sometimes, like Taylor Sheridan, it could be 3 months later, but for independent films, it could be 3 years later. It could never happen. So I think it's important for us to know that there's a lot of that hurry up and wait and just having to be flexible around timing. But we're seeing so much interest right now, more than ever, especially with these new incentives. So I think we're just kind of waiting to see when those production calendars kind of scheduling falls into place.
So this is, of course, the real estate forecast, and so I know people are fond of the predictions, which you can then hold against us later. So I'm going to go down the line and ask each person for a bold prediction about film and television production over the next year. John?
Over the next year, Fort Worth will definitely be the leader in Texas, and I would say definitely in the Southwest and maybe in the entire nation in film-related activity.
It's hard to follow up. I agreed with you, and I think that we will most likely double our soundstage capacity in the next year.
Taylor?
Well, on our end, we're working towards an Oscar-nominated project that's been through Fort Worth. We launched a new program this year called our Premiere Packages, which is helping people to qualify their films for the Academy Awards here. And we had a project that was shortlisted. Unfortunately, they didn't get the nomination this morning, but I'm hoping next year that will be recognized in a different way for us.
I mean, I'm talking a little bit out of school because this is Pintoo's business, but I'm going to predict that, right now everything in Taylor's portfolio is Paramount backed. I'm going to predict that another major studio will bring at least one show to production to Fort Worth.
And I think there'll be a character arc in one of the Taylor shows for a law professor, is my prediction. All right, well, please join me in thanking the panelists for great insight into this topic.